Tennessee's most pressing need, today's tough question, spring practice is less than a month away. So Tennessee's most pressing need, Caleb, I wrote a column on this. It's on offthehooksports.com right now, and we would encourage you to check it out. Now, feel free to agree, disagree, rank these, because I'm going to throw them out there, and then I'll put them as part of our poll question. I kind of combined this one, center/interior of the offensive line. You're replacing Cooper Mays. Andre Keurig's appeal still hasn't gone through. We think it will, but we don't know. And then Wendell Moe Jr. or Sam Pendleton likely on the other side at the guard position. How disconcerting is that moving forward? You're replacing an all-SEC player in Cooper Mays.
Oh, very disconcerting. Because it's not just whether or not, particularly at center, it's not just whether or not the center can do the job. I think Cooper Mays did a lot more than just do what he was supposed to do as the center for Tennessee. I mean, a lot of this was reading and understanding blocking schemes. And the Tennessee offensive line the blocking is simplistic to a certain degree, but it has to be somewhat reactive to the defensive line to where you block to a spot. Does that make sense? I mean, it's kind of in that way like a spread offense where they're not coached to maintain their blocks for longer than like 3 seconds. Is that fair to say?
Yes. No, I think it's very fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah. They're coached to block to a spot to allow the quarterback to step in a spot or for the running back to identify the hole quickly. Understanding those type of things, Cooper Mays was very, very, very good at. And just because William Satterwhite can block, there's no way of knowing if he's going to understand those things until he's actually in a game. And I just think that's way harder than people realize.
I will tell you this. I will tell you this. Out of the people that Coop has told me are special, he's been right every single time. Dylan Sampson was one. I mean, early, like freshman year, I think. He really liked Hendon Hooker. I mean, there's a couple of more that I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh, he told me that Lance Hurd would eventually be good once the ankle got better. And I think you would agree that he probably turned himself into a B, maybe even a B-plus player last half of the season. Cooper thinks William Satterwhite's going to be really, really good. So that's just personal conversations I've had with Cooper. He wouldn't mind me sharing. He thinks he's got a tenacity to him. At the same time, can play with leverage and is a smart player. And you've got to have that at the position. Nico's going to take more of the reins, right, Caleb? But you don't want him in charge of all the blocking assignments.
No, obviously not. Yeah, and that's a huge part of that is Nico. You don't want. I mean, the thing is, the quarterback calls the plays for everybody but the offensive line. The offensive line has their own language, and that's not just, by the way, Heupel's offense. That's pretty much every offense out there. Is that when the quarterback calls the play, the center is going to audible and determine the plays for the rest of the line at the same time. Typically, depending on the system you run, and let's say, if you're a physical, let's go back to the old Bill Parcells I-back offense. If you're that, or even if it's your Cowboys from the 90s, there's not that complex of blocking schemes, right? It's maintain your block. It's just make sure you overwhelm the man in front of you that you got to block.
Yeah. And the only reason you run exotic blocking schemes is because you're overmanned physically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Fulmer Tennessee during their heyday under Fulmer, there weren't complex blocking schemes for that offensive line. It was you just win your battle.
No, the most complex blocking scheme they ran got him fired.
That's true. You're right. I mean, that's a great point.
I mean, it literally got him fired, which is some incredible irony. Okay, now, obviously, we're talking about 3 positions in that one note that I put on the website. So any others are going to have trouble comparing, but cornerback help, I think, is significant. Listen, Josh Heupel can tell me all day long, if he would like to, that Jermod McCoy is going to be 100% healthy by the beginning of the season, but I'll believe it when I see it. We've heard it before about Cooper Mays. We've heard it before about other guys. I think they need to find another cornerback to go alongside Ricky Gibson III.
Oh, they definitely do. And cornerback is going to be a big issue. You're right. They do believe in their guys. Dave, I was actually shocked. I didn't know until I read your column, and then I looked it up, and you were right that Jalen McMurray is back this year. I thought he was gone for some reason the whole time. But him being back, I mean, he's a very smart, reliable, intelligent player. And I think that's a very good situation to be in. But I mean, he's just not physically gifted enough to be a number one guy. So
No.
they're gonna have to figure out something else with that. But look, I mean, you're right. That's going to be interesting how that plays out at cornerback, because I'm not sure exactly how successful they will be at finding another guy to offset Jamal McCoy. But at the same time, I thought Ricky Gibson looked kind of better than McCoy down the stretch of last season. I know that's weird to say, but because now he had an easier role because he was a number 2 guy. But Dave, you and I both know this. When you're playing Ohio State, the top 3 receivers, I mean, everybody, all 3 corners guarding them have a challenge, a pretty equal challenge. And
I thought they were comparable. The reason I think they were comparable is because Ricky Gibson III just got older.
Yes.
I mean, Jermon McCoy was older to start the season, and Ricky Gibson III, this is second year, right? Sophomore last year?
Yep.
Miss a year? Yep. Today's tough question. We're going to get the other 2 positions that Tennessee has absolutely got to address in spring practice. Today's tough question is brought to you by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, banksandjones.com. Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott. Okay, so let me ask you, my next one is linebackers. And here's what I think about the linebackers. I think I like Jeremiah Telander a little bit more than you. Tell me if I'm wrong. And I think we both like Arian Carter a lot. My question is, when Keenan Pili has gone down the past 2 years and they had to go with a backup, the guy hasn't been ready. And it was Telander for part of last year. He ended up playing well, but the year before that, he was not ready. So that's my biggest concern. You've got to find a backup linebacker. I mentioned some possible candidates in my column if you want to address those, but I don't think you feel good if you have to go 12 games deep with just the 2 they have right now.
No, you do not. And that's a really big issue. And look, down the stretch last year, we thought Telander was maybe in a little bit before he was ready, but I'm not saying he'll be bad long term. So we'll have to look at how that goes. I think they got enough bodies that they'll be able to find somebody behind them. I do. I don't know who that'll be, but I think they do have enough bodies that they'll be able to find somebody behind them. We're going to see how that goes.
I've been told it's Spillman. Now, the other that I have, but I want to get to a comment. Okay, Orange Blood says, why isn't wide receiver one of the choices, Dave? Well, I mean, clearly it could be. I think that I like the kids that in Matthews and Brazel, they have coming back more than a lot of people. I really believe that they can be a solid 1-2 punch. I think losing Squirrel White hurts, but they have to address that position. I think they can be better there than most people think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we're forgetting this. Mike Matthews is, and I mean, I do my breakout Vols and things like that later in the year, so I'll do that in August. But guys, most everybody is saying Mike Matthews should be a breakout Vol this year. I think Mike Matthews should have. I think you might agree with me on this, Dave. He should have been starting last year. Seniority is the only reason he wasn't. And had he been starting, I think he would have been an all-star, an all-American, all-SEC guy last year.
Well, and I've never really understood that, the seniority thing. I think players get frustrated by it because they know the other guy's better. Lastly, backup quarterback. You don't have Gaston Moore, he's basically the guy he's the custodian who doesn't do all the cleaning, but he comes in and he empties the trash cans. And that's what he did for Tennessee, he would empty the trash cans. Okay, he didn't toilets and
Love
stuff.
that analogy.
Yeah,
Love that analogy.
He didn't do toilets and stuff, but you need somebody that's going to do everything and be able to make all the throws. He was never asked to do that. Can Merklinger be expected to do that? Because Nico runs a lot, takes a lot of hits. He's got a big frame.
Basically, Gaston Moore is the custodian, the person you hire as part of your I hired the disability program. Like there's just things they physically can't do because they're disabled, but they want a job and they want to be a custodian, so you hire them. But then you're like, oh, they can't go up the stairs, guys. Okay, sorry, I'm going to hell. I know. Lord forgive me. But yes,
Orange Blood, great point. Can I interrupt? Orange Blood says, but depth. Boo is interesting addition, but still. So again, we're assuming Boo is going to play offense. Again, that's one of those things that when a coach says it, I believe it. I mean, I'm not doubting it. I just will believe it. But when has depth ever helped the Vols in this offense at receiver?
None. As a matter of fact, it hurts them because sometimes I don't think they know who to go to. I still remember everybody. And by the way, this is a tale as old as time. The best offenses I usually see, Dave, the most effective, they have a shortened receiver rotation. Remember when Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin changed their offense? They said, we're going to pick one receiver and go to him all the time. You know this. You had a show with him.
You brought that up recently, and I had to think really hard to figure out who the Dallas Cowboys, who I still know their roster, unlike any other roster I probably covered. I had to think who their third receiver was, and it was Kelvin Martin. If you remember him, he played at Miami. But it was Alvin Harper and Michael Irvin over and over and over and over and over. And that's really
how you go. What happened when everybody talks about what David Cutcliffe did with Eric Ainge, Dave, when he came back to Tennessee in 2006? You know what stood out to me was the fact that David Cutcliffe said, we're not doing this 5 receiver rotation anymore that Randy Sanders did. Remember when in 2005, one of their problems was you had CJ Payton, Chris Hannon, Robert Meacham, Jason Swain, and Brett Smith. And they all got equal reps pretty much. And Cutcliffe came in and is like, no, Meacham gets most of the reps. Swain's the complimentary guy and Brett Smith's the slot. That's it. End of story. No questions asked. And what did it do? It turned Meacham into an All-American. Then next year, they didn't even have great receivers. But Cutcliffe said, you know what? Lucas Taylor's going to be our go-to receiver. Period. End of story. No questions asked. He's going to get the bulk of the targets, and he became a 1,000-yard receiver. I think it's always better if you have a guy that gets the bulk of the targets, and then you just have guys to complement him.
Agreed. David says, Dave, should we get a 1-year quarterback if spring game doesn't look good at quarterback? You have George McIntyre in there. We should probably work him in my column. I just think it's probably Merklinger's job to lose. That's a couple of 4-star guys. If you can't get solid play out of them, even though they're young, I'd be a little bit concerned about Josh Heupel.
Yeah. I agree. You got it. Between Jake Merklinger having another year and George McIntyre coming in, you should be able to find one of those guys should be able to be a backup quarterback that could step in if there's an injury. And
now, I want to throw this. Skip Hargis says, I think seniority should never be an issue. Play the guys who are the best. Okay, I tend to agree with you. Skip, but I'll say this. If it's and I've talked to coaches who have said it's sometimes 55-45 in your mind, which one you should play. Then I understand going with the older guy, right?
Yes, for 2 reasons. There's a sentimental side that is a little bit of a weakness, but actually 3. There's that. There's the players. A lot of times the players gravitate towards the older guy because they like him. But then there's the other part too. And no one talks about this, but let's be honest, Dave. If it's 55-45, yeah, you go with the 45 guy, but he's less likely to have a stupid penalty in the game or a dumb drop or a dumb mistake that costs you, right? And doesn't football, we talk about this all the time, but this is the most intelligent thing Butch Jones ever said. Which is, I know it's but it was.
I mean, how the hell do you even start a sentence that just begins like that?
Well, this was the year Tennessee beat South Carolina with the
best thing that Satan never did.
Marquez North made that one-handed grab for Tennessee to beat South Carolina. Butch Jones in the interview with Bob Kessling the next day on the Butch Jones show basically said, the thing about football is you're fighting and gutting it out for 60 minutes. You're running all these plays. And a lot of times it comes down to 3 or 4 plays and you have no idea when they're going to happen. And that's football. So
I'll play the flip side. Corey Anderson, what year was it at fullback that he's going to go score against Alabama and Tennessee's going to upset Alabama and it gets hit right before. I mean, you would have never known, and he didn't try to extend the ball or anything.
One of the greatest play calls ever by an offensive coordinator, undone by the fumble, because that play call by Randy Sanders was a brilliant call right there. And
you're kind of down on Randy. Let me ask you this. Do you think he's closer to Cutcliffe or closer to Clawson?
Well, Dave Clawson's a good offensive coach. So that's not even
then, but he wasn't then.
Well, I don't think he was not. There were dynamics with him and Philip Fulmer that were never going to work ever. ever. Now,
True.
so like if you give me that, I'm taking like, yeah, Randy Sanders is closer to Cutcliffe. My issue with Randy Sanders, and I've said this from the start, and I don't know if it was even Randy, they never developed quarterbacks under Randy Sanders. That was my problem with Randy Sanders. His quarterbacks never got better year to year. Casey Clausen looked no better as a senior than he did as a sophomore.
I don't know. I might argue that point. I hadn't thought about it like that. I like it.